This is video 2 of week 7. So one of these cognitive activities that have been measured experimentally is the mathematical activities, mathematical ability. Okay, so in addition to being similar in their symbolic and non-notational properties, language and number have similar developmental trajectories for young children. Children seem to acquire math on a schedule the same way that they acquire language, also on a schedule that we have seen in previous classes, right? Moreover, in both language and math, basic forms, numbers or letters and sounds indicate abstract meaning constituents that are combined according to a rule-governed set of procedures. So both math and language are rule-governed. If you remember from your introduction to linguistic classes, language is rule-governed, and if you remember from your math classes, mathematics is also rule-governed. To solve mathematical problems, you have to follow the rules of mathematics. Okay, so because of those connections, these two abilities are good candidates for being linked at some level. So the question is there any evidence that skills involving number and quantity are mastered differently by bilinguals and monolinguals? Okay, so I'm going to give you here a bunch of experiments that go way back, and this is because in a lot of the recent literature, either these experiments have been replicated or further developed. So for you to have a reference of what they mean when they refer to any of these tasks, a little bit that's why I told you about the Simon task and so on, right? Because it's good to know what the origin of these proposals were. So here is the sharing task. The sharing task is basically at the point of departure of many of these research. This is based on the children being given some little counting pairs that they should be familiar with from their classroom experience. Those are little figurines, many times in the form of a bear, and they are of different colors. And children are told to sort these figurines by color in the different containers, right? So all the purple ones together, all the yellow ones together, and so on and so forth. So first you want to see whether they have the motor skills to do that, which at this age they should, and then you want to see whether they can differentiate colors, right? So then once you do that, you tell them, okay, there are 13 purple ones, and there is the same number of green ones as purple ones. Therefore, how many green ones are there? And they should tell you without having to count them that there are 13. Because if they understand cardinality, they will not be distracted by the color of the object, and they will be able to zero in on the number of elements. Okay, so that is the sharing task. Another one is the towers task. The towers task is uses two elements, uses duplos, which are the big building blocks, and uses Legos, Lego pieces, which are the small building blocks. Okay, so then you give them 6 Lego pieces and 6 Duplo pieces, and then you tell the children to build a tower, and then you tell them, okay, which tower is bigger, and then they say, okay, the Duplo tower is bigger because the pieces are bigger, right? But then you tell them, okay, so there are 6 Duplo pieces, and there are as many Lego pieces as Duplo pieces. Therefore, how many Lego pieces are there? And children should be able to tell you 6 Lego pieces. Don't be misled here by the picture, which is just taken from the internet. But you take my word for it that you give them the same amount of pieces in the experiment. So children should not be distracted by the perceptually misleading characteristics of the towers. In this case, a very salient one, such as the size, and then they should be able, or when you're asking them to do that, to zero in on the cardinality and the shared cardinality. Okay, so what happened when they originally they made these experiments again and again to both multilingual children and monolingual children. So the results indicate that there was no difference between the two groups in their ability to solve the sharing task, so the cardinality task. But there was a significant bilingual advantage in the towers task. So they were less misled by size, and they were able to say, okay, there's equal amount of pieces, right? And you can do a different version of that, which is to achieve the same size, how many pieces, and things like that. But pretty much they found that there was a bilingual advantage in small children. Okay, so now from the sharing task, it is clear that the groups do not differ in their basic level of knowledge about cardinality. They know how to count, and they understand that if you have two groups and they have the same amount of pieces, that the cardinality remains the same. But from the towers task, it is apparent that they differ in how they are able to apply this knowledge in the solution to specific problems, and specifically in the presence of perceptually misleading cues. Okay? Now, what happened when you do this research with adults? Do they also show this kind of advantage when they are multilingual? Now, when you ask adults not to do towers, to make towers and so forth, but to do basic arithmetic tasks, results indicate that there is a significant monolingual advantage in computing those tasks. So monolingual adults are slightly better than multilingual adults in doing basic math. Okay, it is not clear why, but it might indicate differences in working memory for the two groups. Perhaps it might be that multilingual adults have an extra load on their working memory because of dealing with the two languages and so forth, but it's not really clear why. Okay, so these are the results that we get roughly from studies that look at mathematical ability on the variation of whether a person is multilingual or monolingual. Now, what is the conclusion then? So the results of these studies present a complex picture and appear in some instance to be contradicting each other. The children's studies with the adult studies. The most generous interpretation is that is consistent with the data is that bilingualism has no effect on mathematical problem solving, at least in the long term. Okay, that whatever children advantage is does not translate into an adult advantage. And that's, of course, provided that language proficiency is at least adequate for understanding the problem. If you're dealing with a weaker language, for example, or if you're dealing with multilinguals that do not understand what is being asked from them, then, of course, they will perform worse. Okay? So although there may be some differences in the speed with which arithmetic calculations can proceed in a weaker language, when you ask multilingual adults to do those operations in a weaker language, bilingualism appears to have virtually no effect on mathematical problem solving. Okay? Now, if it's not math, then what? Then what could be a different dimension in which multilingualism might have some effect. Okay, and the effect of multilingualism may not be in the structure of knowledge, but in the nature of processing. Okay, to test this possibility, we need to explore aspects of cognition that are more at the periphery of linguistic influence. So not in the nature of symbolic representation and rule-governed processes, but more in how people think, if you want. Processes having to do with creativity and problem solving, the process of problem solving, and how creative people are able to solve those problems. Okay, so getting away from or moving away from domain-specific problems into nature of problem solving. So what has been proposed? There are a number of problem-solving studies that have been proposed, and again, I'm going to present to you here some classic ones. But the hypothesis is going to be always that relevant aspects of a problem may become more salient to bilingual children because their experiences with two languages and cultures enables them to incorporate different perspectives to the solution. Okay, so it is hypothesized that they might present that this constant looking at reality from different points of view might give them an edge in looking at a problem from different points of view, and therefore come up with more creative solutions. Okay, so this has been tested giving small children, physical science problems. And even though something like the Archimedes principle is something that you learn in physics class later, that is given to children that have not studied it, and then see whether they can give a spontaneous solution to the problem of, for example, how to calculate how much liquid is going to be displaced when you put an object on water. Okay. Now, in these problems, which is a classic problem of the Archimedes problem, bilingual children performed better than monolingual children did. Better in the sense that their hypotheses were more structurally complex and qualitatively sophisticated. Okay, so in these problems, in an intuitive solution to these problems, bilingual children were more sophisticated in the solutions that they proposed. Now, later studies included not only how sophisticated and complex the solutions were, but also issues of fluency, flexibility of thinking, creativity, and concept formation. So evaluating the kid more holistically. Now, the main finding was the monolinguals scored higher here. However, the deficit occurred only for the low bilingual subjects. Fully bilingual participants were equivalent to monolinguals. This is very important. Okay, so once you are not so sloppy in putting people into monolingual and bilingual, but you actually put them in a continuum, and you only accept the highly bilingual or the fully bilingual participants, meaning the ones who are more balanced, who are more developed in both of their languages, then you get a result that is indistinguishable, statistically speaking, from monolingual speakers. Okay, so it might be that the previous studies showed a monolingual advantage just because they didn't control for this factor also. Okay. So it's a little bit contradictory still. You get studies that tell you of a bilingual advantage, you get studies that tell you of a monolingual advantage, but when proficiency is taken into consideration, then you see no advantage whatsoever by either group. Okay. There are other experiments based on other tasks, such as the block design test, in which the individual has to translate a two-dimensional diagram into a three-dimensional little construction. There's the water level task, in which people are asked to pour the same amount of water in different recipients. One is tall and the other one is short, and they are asked whether it's the same amount of water or whether they are misled by the shape of the water. And the juice task, in which this is more complex, in which people are asked to identify whether the same proportion of water is poured, even though they have different amount of glasses in which it is poured. Okay. Now the two first tasks, they have high control requirements, while the third task has high analysis requirements. You have to know that 2/5 is basically the same as 3/7 and things like that. Okay. Fully bilingual children. So here you are controlling that they are fully bilingual, score significantly higher on the high control tasks, right? On the high control task. Does that sound familiar? Okay. Now, other tasks, such as the sorting task. The sorting task is made with cards that have different diagrams or different pictures in them. Okay, and then you're asking children to do a series of tasks, one after the other. The first one would be to sort the cards by color to put in one pile, the blue squares with the blue circles and the red squares with the red circles, and so on and so forth. Okay, whether they can do that. Again, this is just basic. Now, you make them revise that, so you give them the cards again, and then you mix them again, you shuffle them, and then you tell them to sort the cards by color and shape. So the blue squares in one place, and the red squares and another pile, and the red circles in one pile, and the red squares in another pile, and so on and so forth. So it's a different thing, different task that they were doing before, but still very basic. Okay. Now, instead of only paying attention to the squares and circles in the cards, you give them cards, or maybe you had them from the beginning, in which you had also bunnies and flowers, for example. And then you tell them to sort the cards by color and object. So the red bunnies with the red bunnies, and the blue flowers with blue flowers, or red bunnies with the blue bunnies, and things like that. Okay, and different from the squares and the circles. And finally, you give them cards, or you include cards that also have pictures of things that have a function or have a typical location. So those are more culturally specific, if you want. And then you tell them to classify those by function and location. So tell them, okay, everything that you can find inside the home, put them in this pile. Everything that you typically find outside the home, put it in that other pile. Or if you also had a table, so things that you can sit on in these piles, things that you can write on or eat on, put in this pile, and so forth. Right? What are the cognitive abilities that you're mobilizing here? So first, you are mobilizing the ability of children to conceptualize the rules in all their conditions, so that they can compute the instructions that they are given. That's the first cognitive requirement. The second cognitive requirement is that they should be able, how well they are able, to revise the rules that you gave them, the instructions that you gave them in the first task, and apply the instructions that you give them in the second task. So how good they are at changing their attention from one task that they just performed to the next task that you are asking from them. Then third, you are testing how good they are at the motor inhibition of the previous correct response. So not only that they actually understand that they should do something different, but how good they are at actually inhibiting the kind of the habit or the impulse of doing what they have been doing in the previous task. Okay, and finally, you have another cognitive demand, which is the cognitive inhibition of the attention to misleading mental representation. So if you are telling them, sort the cards by color, then they should inhibit shape. And if you tell them sort the cards by shape, they should inhibit color. Okay, so they have to be able to inhibit, to not be misled by some clues like before. Okay. So let's see what the results indicate when these experiments have been performed on different ages of children, but these are very young children. Okay, so these are the instructions, the tasks, and these are the cognitive requirements. So the results are bilinguals were better at number 2 and number 3, which are these tasks that are to being able to revise the previous response and to not be misled by irrelevant information. It might be that just the basic tasks of sorting, the first one, is just too simple. So it just does not make any difference whether you are bilingual or multilingual or anything, just because they can do it without mobilizing much of their cognition. It might be that the last one, the function and location for this particular group of kids, it might be that it's too complex. So when it's too complex, both groups find too much difficulty, and then it's a matter of individual difference, not as much as a difference that you can attribute to a group characteristics, okay? But in any way, the ones that bilinguals are better at are the ones that crucially require a revision of obsolete conditions which interfere with the new decision, okay? And this is a matter of flexibility. So bilinguals seem to show more flexibility in their performance of tasks, provided that those tasks are not either too simple or too complex. So in the middle range of tasks, bilinguals seem to be more flexible thinkers. They could revise things better and faster, and they were also better at not being distracted. They were more flexible about changing their attention. Okay? So what is the conclusion? These studies support the interpretation that bilingual children are approaching certain nonverbal problems and non-mathematical problems differently from monolinguals, and that this difference leads to better performance in some situations, these ones that are not too demanding or too simple. Okay? When advantages occur, they tend to be confined to individuals who have high proficiency in both languages. This is important. So apparently you only get the benefits of multilingualism, of being multilingual, if you have fully developed your potentiality in both languages, right? So only small or very poorly developed language abilities do not seem to make to give you any advantage. But if you fully develop your languages, it seems that it might give you some advantage in some conditions. The tasks that demonstrate this advantage, though, are those that involve characteristic demands such as flexibility and attention, and in the presence of misleading information. So it's always when you have misleading information that you're not distracted by it as much, and when flexibility and a switch in attention is required. Then in those cases, and you have high proficiency, so highly proficient multilinguals are showing some kind of advantage in how fast and how well they do things. Now, why would multilingualism affect processing in this way? And the explanation is most likely to be found at the level of specific cognitive processes. Okay? What do I mean by specific cognitive processes? So those are when the underlying knowledge is the same. Remember cardinality, right? So obviously if you have different knowledge, then you cannot compare because you have more variables. But the difference is that in some cases, there is a misleading context. So the analysis axis of the problems is irrelevant, but the control one is the one that seems to be yielding different results. So the bilingual children, as a conclusion, have an advantage in control, but not necessarily an advantage in analysis. Okay, so more specifically, tasks that showed a bilingual advantage had in common a misleading context and a moderate conceptual demands. Tasks that showed no difference between groups tended to make more complex conceptual demands or require more detailed mental representations, more analysis. So it is important to very specifically notice and specify where this advantage in performance comes from, whether it's located, right? It comes from being multilingual. Okay, so in the next video, I will present to you beyond this control ability, what other studies have also been correlated with the variable of being multilingual or monolingual.